So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for the series of webinars that we are organizing within YSI, which is called Why Do Climate Negotiations Fail? This title, we are trying to explore and to give answers from our community and from invited speakers. And we are doing this from 3 different lenses. Our first webinar in March was from a practical point of view. Our webinar today, it is going to be from a negotiator point of view. And our last webinar in 2 months, or the beginning of July, we will announce this very soon, is going to be from a theoretical perspective. So as you all know, and if not, we will be sharing one more time the link in the chat. You are all invited to join this. You are invited to watch already the recording of the first webinar. For the ones that are joining and watching this online afterwards, you can watch the first one and join us live for the next webinar that we will have. This webinar and this project that we are doing within YSI is part of much more initiatives that we are doing. Many of us in the YSI community are part of the processes of the United Nations Rio Convention. We have been part of several processes at SB meetings, the process last year that we took part in COP29 in Baku. And we believe that these spaces are very important for us as YSI community to take part, to learn, and to bring our voices and our knowledge into these spaces and learn from others as well. So that's why we keep having this invitation, which is joining this series of webinars, and thank you for those that are here already. And also this year, we are going to continue with one project that we launched last year, which was the first time that we did a simulation on the UNFCCC process. So last year we did specifically for the UNFCCC project, we ran a simulation of the COP, and we had 15 young scholars joining us from different parts of the world. Some of them are here with us, taking part in the webinar today, and also joining us as discussants of the webinar today. And this year, the second edition will not be in Poland. Last year we did it in Poland, and it was a very great beginning with simulation, and also visiting a farm and working together in a message that we brought to COP29 with the members of YSI. But this year, this project will be in Bonn, where the SB62 will take part. So we are very, very happy because we have this partnership with the UN, and we managed to bring the simulation, and not only the simulation, but also opening the space. And we are co-creating a project that will invite scholars from YSI, but also the staff from the UN, so real negotiators and people that are really taking those roles are going to play other roles and be part of the simulation. So one of my colleagues, I think Mateusz, already shared that in the chat. The applications for the project is already live. So you are already invited to apply for the project. It's going to be in October. So it will be a full day of the 14th and 15th of October. So we think this is a great invitation, and we are grateful to YSI for making this possible. So we wanted to start with that, with these invitations, and also I'm happy to see that more people are connecting to the webinar. And with that, I want to share that as part of this, last year, when we were together with Mateusz in COP29, in one of the multiple events that happened in Baku, we had the pleasure of meeting Wassim. Wassim, he is actually a negotiator. He's a negotiator for the Lebanon government. But also and I will not read his full bio because he has a lot of experience with in the process. But what I will do is share the full bio in the link, and just share that he's joining us because he also is a Marine and Maritime Policy Research Fellow at the Southampton Marine and Maritime Institute of the University of Southampton, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And following that, I will share his full bio with all of you in the chat so you can access. And after I will give the floor to him to share with us his perspective and to respond to the question of the webinar series. And after that, we will follow the same structure that we follow for the webinars, which is that we will have 3 discussants sharing their thoughts and the thoughts after hearing our invited speaker, some questions that he will reply, and after that we will open the floor for Q&A. So you are invited to, like as you are hearing the presentation, write questions in the chat, or in the moment of the Q&A, raise your hand and you will have the floor. So with that, I will give you the floor to share with us your perspectives.
Thank you so much, Maria. Thank you so much. I'm just gonna make sure. Okay. I hope you can see. If you can give me a thumbs up, if you can see my screen. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Maria, Virginia, and everybody else from the YSI as well for the invitation for me to give this presentation. Like I said, I think it's a very, very important topic, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to speak about it from my perspective as a negotiator and highlight some of the challenges, but also some of the ways forward that we can take. So what I wanted to do with you today is share, just in line with the series that you described, I want to share with you a personal and critical perspective on why climate negotiations often fall short and why, despite everything, there is still hope. And I want to start by setting the scene, first of all. I wanted to share those are personal insights about the challenges that climate negotiations and how negotiators can shift from being part of the problem to becoming part of the solution. And in order to do that, I will be highlighting the close relationship between the inner and outer dimensions of climate negotiations. I will be describing the psychological and inner experience of climate negotiators and why it limits and how it limits their performance. And finally, I would like to also talk about the skills and the capacities that negotiators need to nurture to effectuate systemic change. So I'm thinking about it more from a bottom-up approach. But before I get to that, I wanted to briefly talk about my journey to climate negotiations. So my background is in maritime law and ocean governance. I'm a research fellow at the Southampton Marine and Maritime Institute at the University of Southampton. But I started attending and participating in the UNFCCC sessions since COP26 in Glasgow, where I was an observer with the University of Southampton. And then I became a part of the Lebanese delegation since COP28 in Dubai, where I was leading on the Just Transition Work Program. And one of my earlier realizations being in this space was that there were deeper problems than what we see on the surface. And being naturally curious to seek systemic truth, I felt that this is the place for me to be. I felt like the climate negotiations are the place where we can feel, these underlying power dynamics and the structures that shape the world that we live in the most. So I felt like I needed to be in this place. And I wanted to start by sharing a couple of quotes that I think summarize very nicely the gist of my presentation. One of them is from Krishnamurti, who says that it needs great intelligence to live together, not surrender to each other or be dominated by one another. Relationship is the most difficult thing in life. And another quote by Osho, who says that to be authentic means to be totally factual. Ideologies, theories, isms, they distort you and they give you a false persona. And yet we are predominantly very poorly trained in the skill of relating to one another or to our surrounding environment, whether natural or non-natural. Generally, those skills are perceived as unrewarding or even counterintuitive. On the other hand, we are constantly, either directly or indirectly, being encouraged to seek to dominate one another in various aspects of our lives, as I will get to. And being capable of dominating one another is, on the other hand, perceived as being useful and rewarding because it advances our interests, whether personally or collectively. So why do climate negotiations fail? That will be my first part. And before I get into the meat of it, I wanted to just briefly talk about what the negotiations are about. Negotiations are about basically shaping that collective response to climate change, which then states will take individually and move forward individually through their national policies and so on. But it also includes looking at the socio-economic impacts of the response to climate change. So at the heart of it, it is very much an environmental distributive justice issue. And when parties and states participate in the negotiations, what they're actually doing is that they're participating in developing a body of international law in the form of the decisions and the outcomes of the negotiations. And a very clear example of that is the Paris Agreement and the Kyoto Protocol that were decisions adopted after negotiations. But also the smaller changes and developments, the incremental changes of this body of law through the various outcomes of the negotiations. And this is important for us to keep in mind because this underpins, this is always at the back of states' thinking during negotiations because they want to make sure that they don't end up with collective outcomes that will be difficult or onerous for them to follow through on. So it's really important important for us to keep that at the back of our heads. And what I would like to share with you is some of my insights, the insights that I gained from participating and leading on the Just Transition Work Program, but also looking at what was happening with the finance discussions during the last COP in particular. And I thought that there would be a good place for us to start, basically. And what I felt was, and what I saw, what I've experienced was that there were dominant power dynamics in the negotiations that led to the outcomes, basically, that we reached, or lack of outcomes when it comes to the Just Transition Work Program. And what I felt was that what I've experienced was that there were two types of power dynamics that were at play at the same time. On the one hand, there was an asymmetry of power between those who hold the power to address climate change and are more resilient to climate change, climate impacts, and those who hold less power to address climate change and are less resilient to climate change. And on the other hand, another power dynamic, and there was a power balance actually between developed countries of the global north and the emerging economies or rich countries of the global south. And the underlying concern of each of those the power dynamics is, for the first one, when it comes to the concern of the rich nations, it was not to assume responsibility for others at the expense of their own interests. And when it comes to the balance between the rich nations from the global north and the global south, the concern was about who comes out on top, who's better than, who's worse than. And of course, these two concerns influence each other because if I am not responsible at the expense, for others at the expense of my interests, and my counterpart is not, my other rich counterpart is not, then I am at a disadvantage. So those two power dynamics and concerns were constantly interaction, and they led to a situation where the behavior predominantly by those who can address climate change and hold the keys was, their behavior was, it's better for us not to move than to move on a losing trajectory. And this is very much coming from a subjective view that they hold, which I wanna get into in a little bit more detail in this slide. So it leads to a situation where the negotiators are operating within a distorted reality. And that distorted reality is created by, initially, the fact that those in power hold the subjective view that we as a collective can afford to delay climate action so long as they are not moving on a losing trajectory. But of course, this does not align with the science. And what I'm sharing here is just a map of the tipping points, which once we cross will lead to irreversible environmental damage and degradation. And I just wanted to show, I mean, I'm not going to go into the science, but the IPCC reports and the science is conclusive on the interconnectedness and the fact that the effects will be global. The effects of climate change will be global, and that we need to act soon. And also, this subjective view does not align, not even with the text of the Paris Agreement or even the outcomes of the negotiations, including the GST outcome in Dubai, which I'm sharing here, the Article 2.1a of the Paris Agreement, which is about the long-term temperature goal, and Article 4.1 of the Paris Agreement, which is about how we will take that goal forward. And both of them, and what I wanted to stress is that both of them recognize that if we don't take action now, the impacts will be greater, and that we need to act as soon as possible, act rapidly, and so on. So we don't actually have the time. So the reality is that we will have worse long-term outcomes for everybody because of this irreversible harm in an interconnected system. And the crux of the problem is that, irrespective of what the science or the law says, those who hold the power to address climate change perceive that we can afford delay in climate action. And that's led me to think that if it wasn't for this view, there would be less tension between what we know about climate change and how to deal with it as the emergency that it is. And this realization actually made me wonder what shapes their view in the first place. And I thought I will just leave you with a hint at the end of the first part for now. I'll let you look at the screen for a bit. But in a nutshell, what I came to realize was that this subjective view that we can afford delay is shaped by a lot of what happens outside of the negotiation space altogether. It has to do with what is referred to, as I will get to in the following slides, it is referred to as the dominant social paradigms we live in and the disconnection that those paradigms create in us. And this brings me to the end of my first part, but how can negotiators then shift from being part of the problem to being part of the solution? And for that, I think it's useful for us to consider, I mean, we need to understand the problem better. It's useful for us to consider the inner and outer dimensions of climate negotiations, because that will allow us to uncover the invisible aspects that shape the outcomes and the behaviors that we see during these UNFCCC sessions. It is only through uncovering those aspects and gaining a deeper understanding of what is at play that we can begin to address the issues within them. In other words, this will allow us also to understand the challenges that the negotiators go through during the negotiations, and will also allow us to identify the capacity building needs to help them overcome those challenges. So I have already gone through which power dynamics and have, in my experience, been the most damaging to the negotiation outcomes and the mindsets that underpin them, and how they translate in the behaviors of those who hold the power to drive meaningful action, meaningful climate action. But what I would like to share with you, I mean, and highlight by referring to this iceberg framework, is that the deeper layers, such as mindsets and power dynamics, also shape the structures that sit closer to the surface, which then in turn play a crucial role in shaping the behaviors and the outcomes above the surface. And ultimately, it will always be difficult for the negotiators to operate within a structure which is not conducive for the outcomes that we need. But what they can do is develop the skills and the qualities to improve their capacity to navigate it effectively and to pave the way for change. And one thing I would also like to stress is that while aspects near the top of the iceberg are influenced and shaped by the deeper layers beneath them, surface level events and patterns, so the behaviors and what appears, can also reinforce the underlying structures and beliefs by confirming them through lived experiences and outcomes. So I would like to make a case, basically, for reimagining the role of the climate negotiators. But before I do that, it's important to recognize that they are not the only players. They're not the only ones responsible for those outcomes, even though they play a crucial role in it. They are at the heart of a process that is driven by the parties. But I want to be fair to them and situate them amongst many other stakeholders. But what I would like to do is, moving from the surface to the deeper layers, I want to refer to what the experts have been saying on this topic. And the experts have started questioning the appropriateness of the whole structure of the negotiations. And they started to approach the issue of climate change much more holistically. And what I'm including here is, I'm not going to go through this quote from Farhana Sultana in her latest book, Confronting Climate Coloniality. But it speaks exactly to this point. It highlights that there are structural changes that are needed for us to reach those outcomes that we need to move away from exploitative systems and to reach equitable outcomes and our response to climate change. But she describes in this quote how this governance system is underpinned by a long history of coloniality, imperialism, exploitative behaviors, and a lot of ideologies, which led to a situation whereby we have a small group of elites who dominate discursive framings around climate change. And that in itself creates a huge barrier for changing the structures that have led to the climate change crisis in the first place. And my effort in this presentation is to help you realize that to think of negotiators as part of this structure. Negotiators are the vehicles that take this structure forward, actually, and give it life. And they are influenced by those very same, this very same history and those deeper layers that have shaped the structure. So, and this affects many things in their behaviors. It affects how we frame the climate discussion in the first place, how as negotiators we engage with our counterparts from different countries, how we interpret the outcomes, or even how we think about climate change as an issue more broadly. And what it means is that it risks turning us negotiators into a cog in the system, into being part of the problem. And we're faced with a situation where we must decide whether we carry on with business as usual and we risk perpetuating a situation that is no longer sustainable, or we nurture the qualities needed so that we move beyond and transcend the inherited mindsets to pave the way for the solutions that we need. So negotiations, and I wanted to talk a little bit more about this barrier of the structure and how it creates the challenges for the negotiators. And I would join Farhana Sultana and other commentators and experts in saying that the structure of climate negotiations is not conducive for meaningful collective climate action. In fact, it was put in place by, the structure was intentionally designed by those who hold the power, whether financially, politically, diplomatically, and historically, to ensure that they can exert their power in the climate negotiations and preserve their supremacy. This is a notion that is referred to commonly as climate coloniality. And because of that, I think it's important for us to always view the UNFCCC framework and the negotiations to situate them within the broader UN framework and system, which is in itself marked by those inequalities, and we shouldn't see it as separate from it. And what I would like to highlight here is that the reality is that negotiators face an uphill struggle with breaking free from that system that they operate within. And I've even seen that we've started to acknowledge that the negotiators, that the problem is systemic for the negotiators. But what we haven't seen enough of, but it's starting to see some of it now, is paying attention to the fact that negotiators haven't developed the inner skills to navigate a lot of these challenges. And I'm sharing some of the examples just in this box about the structural challenges. I will not get the chance to get into them now, but I'm happy to go through them in the Q&As and the discussion afterwards. But my point is, I mean, delving deeper, in the iceberg example, I wanted to move to the mindset barrier. And what I really wanted to highlight here is that the paradigms of thoughts and mindsets shape the power dynamics and structures, but they are not the deepest dimension of climate negotiations. And this is where I would like to refer to what you can see on the figure there, the ecological divide, social divide, spatial divide, what is referred to by others as those dominant social paradigms. And this is where I would like to highlight actually research that was conducted by Wamsler and Bristow into the connection of the inner and outer dimensions of climate change. They interviewed high-level policymakers worldwide and explored the intersection of mind and climate change. And they found that mind acts both as a root of climate change and as a barrier to adequate climate action. And another key finding was that at the heart of the problem is the issue of disconnection with ourselves, with others, and with nature, which is in itself, as this quote that I've shared there, it's a result, it's an outward manifestation, basically, of the exploitative mindsets. And it is shaped by the dominant social paradigms that I shared a hint about before. So I want to unpack that a little bit more. So using this diagram here. So those dominant social paradigms, think about that slide at the end of the first part where I told you to just have a moment and look at it. Those dominant social paradigms intersect in reinforcing this connection with ourselves, whether we're talking about consumerism, militarism, competition in sports or in our careers and so on. Or nationalism, all the other isms, they intersect in the fact that they reinforce this connection with ourselves and our nature and the surrounding environment. And this creates an inner view, an invisible view and the mindset in us, which is competitive, which is exploitative. And then when we externalize this mindset and we share ourselves with the world, basically interact with the world, we adopt these exploitative behaviors, which were the root cause of climate change. And at the same time, once we put them into life, we reinforce and confirm the disconnection at the root of the exploitative mindsets that we started from. And this just confirms that we must start from the issue of disconnection. Otherwise, whenever we are faced with the challenges of the negotiations, we will fall back on our respective dominant social paradigms, especially when things get stressful. And that's what I would like to also get into a little bit more detail. So on the top of this diagram, and this is the inner journey of the climate negotiators, we're operating in a structure which is not conducive for the outcomes that we need to reach, which are very complex, and there's a huge responsibility on our shoulders that we need to live up to. And this creates in us various emotions, including stress, guilt, anxiety, frustration. You may feel superior to others or inferior to others, depending on if you're benefiting or not from the system. And you may feel helpless in the face of all of this. And as an automatic and unconscious response to that, we start searching for emotional or psychological safety or a sense of comfort or control. And the way we do that, and I'm putting some references there from experts in the field, the way that we do that is that we unconsciously resort to those dominant and familiar social paradigms and thought patterns. And by doing that, we will be doing what we have always done, even when the results are ineffective. Or in other words, as Osho was saying, the reality will be missed and we are suddenly acting and acting. We become involved, not in reality, but in a game in which we are enacting the culture, the education, the society, or in other words, the dominant social paradigms. So we end up perpetuating the same mindsets which are at the root of the climate crisis and the unfavorable, and which are at the root of the unfavorable negotiation structures. And in the end, we ended up in a situation where we cannot advance, we cannot adopt and take adequate climate action. What this means is that if we do not succeed in changing the system will change us. And this really highlights the importance of the inner development of climate negotiators. And I wanted to give a couple of quick examples of how those dominant paradigms shape the unconstructive negotiation dynamics and outcomes. So I wanted to start just by those dominant paradigms. I'm not going to get into details or single them out. And I'm giving two examples of the types of mindset that it can generate. On the left, I'm talking about how those paradigms, for example, nationalism, can give us a perception of separateness from others in a national environment due to our individual or collective identification with those dominant paradigms. Or it can give us a perception that the world is made up of separate parts that are represented by the states. And this affects the dynamics in the negotiation rooms and the structure. On the one hand, it leads to polarization and those me versus you or us versus them dynamics. Or on the right side, it leads to negotiations being perceived as being about advancing national interests and oblivious to how states can operate across borders through international corporations and so on. And as a result, it leads to behaviors that are unhelpful. On the left side here, it leads to mistrust and exploitative or even defensive behaviors that are not conducive for consensus building. And on the right side, it leads to inappropriate solutions and outcomes because they are ignoring the cross-border nature of the problem that we're facing. So it leads to gaps in our thinking. But this is not all negative. And thankfully, there's growth and some of there's initiatives that have been up and running that are focusing on those, and particularly on the inner dimension and the inner developments of individuals, of all change agents, including the climate negotiators. And I would not get the chance to get into this in detail now, but I would really encourage everybody to go and look into the inner development goal framework, which takes you through various stages as well. And I would encourage you also to refer to other resources. I'm putting a few there, including the Shaping Tomorrow playbook, which I was very happy to be a contributor to, and it was a collaboration between the Climate Coaching Alliance and the University of Southampton and other experts from around the world. And I'm putting other resources there as well for the viewers to refer to. And I wanted to close with a couple of remarks, or with a few remarks. So what I would love for you to take out from this is that we need to develop the inner skills of climate negotiators, specifically, and firstly, to avoid them falling back to the dominant thought patterns, which were at the root cause of climate change in the first place. And that change is possible, but it will only be possible if we deliberately restore human intelligence. We need to peel away the layers that have conditioned our minds and disconnected us from our core. And finally, it is about transcending power dynamics, not winning at them. What we need is more capacity to compromise. But in order for us to do that, we need to shift our mindsets from one where we view our interests as competing with each other, and one where we see the planet as being made up of disconnected parts, to one where we realize the interconnectedness of different parts of the world. And I will end it there, but I'm really looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wassim. I was very impressed during the full lesson that you and everything that you share with us. I want to say that we talked before the call that you were going to share the slides with us, and we will share with everyone. Yes. Because I think there is everything that you said was very rich, and there is a lot to reflect in every single part of the slides. So I am very curious to know how the discussion will go. So let me give the word to Mateusz, who is our first discussant, and also to share with everyone that together with Mateusz and Nurland, because I didn't say that at the beginning, we are the organizers of this series of webinars. So also they are the ones making all the magic together. So Mateusz.
All of that for you, dear participants and members of YSI. Thank you for giving me the floor. Thank you for a tremendous presentation, Wassim, and your tremendous work, a little bit of which we saw at the COP29, because that's how we first crossed paths, and sharing in such a beautiful way everything that you shared with us now. Very briefly, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Mateusz Ciasnocha. I'm Polish. I'm a farmer from Poland who is on the mission of building farmer-centric bridges between climate and agriculture policy, or policies, and UN Rio conventions broadly, with the climate convention in particular, are very important spaces and areas for this bridge building, and where this bridge building is needed. Hence our work and my participation in those spaces. Very much supported by YSI as well. So that's a way of introduction. And as those who know me, you will not be surprised for me to say, hey, I have so many questions, but I will limit myself only to two, so that others can ask their question. And maybe if we are lacking questions, I'm happy to step in with 2 or 3 or 17 others that I have listed as I've been listening to you. So those two questions are the following, Wassim. The first one is an obvious one, but it's the question that we are having in every single YSI space that we join or we co-create when it comes to climate negotiations. And you didn't really answer that in the presentation, but you kind of said a fact. The fact is you joined COP26 as a university representative, and then suddenly out of the blue you said, I've been the country negotiator for COP29. So the simple question is, how do you become a negotiator of a country? What did you do? What was the process? How can we replicate you and do the same? Would you recommend us to replicate you, or you'd rather be a university student participating in the COP rather than a country negotiator? Second question, if I can, which also emerges a lot during our YSI and other work when it comes to the UNFCCC process, which is a tricky one and probably requires a full presentation in itself, but still it would be amazing to get your 2 minutes on it. It is not exactly that you negotiate as a country in the convention, in the process. You negotiate as a negotiation group, from what we understand. And this is kind of a mystery. Like, okay, so you are a country negotiator, but your group is negotiating. How does this work? Not, how the negotiations work as such, but how do you negotiate as a country? Which group do you belong to? How is that working? What are the entry points to influence or be informed about this process, or to inform you as negotiators and country groups so that you guys can negotiate well? As you said, you are part of the process, a very important one, but the part. So building bridges and relationships are very important. So that's from my end. Very grateful. Over to you. The two questions are: how do you become the negotiator? And tell us more about country groups as negotiation framework for the convention. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. No, thank you so much for the questions. And I would love to take more even after the session. So on the first question, very honestly, COP26 happened by luck for me, even COP26. It happened that I am in the UK and COP26 happened. Let me start by saying that coming from Lebanon and living all my life in Lebanon before coming to the UK to study and then start working here, my priorities shifted a lot in this journey. I had no understanding of what climate change was until I finished my PhD, not even when I did my master's at the university. So when COP26 happened, I didn't have a lot of idea about what it is, but I knew it was a big thing and it was happening in our backyard. So we need to make sure that we're there. And I was lucky enough that my university, other colleagues at my university were kind enough to have led on the application to have observer status and so on. And we had some slots for us to be represented there. But of course, being an observer doesn't allow you to get into a lot of the negotiation rooms. It doesn't allow you to even communicate with the secretariat in the same way. You don't have the same weight. You don't have the same influence on. I mean, I participated in some activities that were very important for us as an institute, including the Ocean Dialogue and so on. But I felt like there was more to do. And becoming a party delegate, was also I would not recommend anybody replicating it. That's the first answer. And it was also very random. I would say some of it is random and some of it is not, because I certainly was persistent and I tried to shape my role in my current role as a researcher and I was also involved in the interface between research and policymaking. So I tried to restructure my role for it to include my participation in the UNFCCC sessions and so on. And I persisted on being there and during the bond negotiation, the SB sessions and the COPs and so on. And it was hard work, obviously, but then for me, it was a matter of luck that I went to a plenary session and I looked at Lebanon's seat, which was empty, and I sat there and I filled the empty seat until somebody just poked me on the back of my shoulder and was like, do you mind giving me back my seat? And I was like, I held my ground initially. It was like, who are you to take me out of my seat, And it turns out to be the head of the Lebanese delegation. And that was the main contact. That's how I touched base with the delegation. And it took actually 2 years of continuing to nurture that relation and being there and showing, also my enthusiasm and passion about making some change there and bringing some expertise, also niche expertise in ocean governance and maritime law and so on. I made the case for me to become part of the Lebanese delegation in the end. And it's a mutually beneficial relationship, I would say, because they need the capacity and I need the platform, and it's been a lot of work on top of my work, to be honest, but it's been really eye-opening, and it's given me all the insights that I've shared with you. Second question about the negotiation blocks dynamics. I mean, you're asking somebody who's, I mean, Lebanon is part of two blocks. Other parties will be part of even much more. It could be 4 or 5. I'm not sure what the record is, but Lebanon is true. Countries, theoretically speaking, would negotiate as part of the negotiation blocks because theoretically they have common priorities or circumstances and so on. And theoretically, the assumption is by having more people, more numbers, you have a louder voice and you can influence more. And I think this is not entirely true. This is theoretical more than actually in practice. And this is one of the structural barriers that I've included on my slide, actually, which I didn't get to get into, because I mean, if I can put it this way, and hopefully this will get across to others, because I don't want to talk specifically about Lebanon's relation within the Arab group in particular, which has its own sets of challenges, because Lebanon within, I mean, let me talk about it briefly, actually. Lebanon within the Arab group is dealing with other large economies, all producing economies, you know, and they have very different circumstances than Lebanon, very different pressures, very different status under the convention and the Paris Agreement and so on. I mean, they're much more concerned. They have much more different capacities, and you know, and so on and so forth. So I think it's a little bit, you know, there's some commonalities, but not enough for Lebanon to find synergies within that group, and it's a challenge in itself. But the bigger, I think, the thing that the issue that most people, I think, would relate to is this false promise of the G77 and China as a negotiation bloc of 134 countries having such a heavy weight. But this negotiation bloc is in itself composed of so many different countries that have so many different circumstances, from the very poorest to some of the richest on the planet. And they're always, I mean, because the process is based on consensus, even within the negotiation blocks, you need to align your views for you to have a louder voice on the negotiation table. But it's so difficult for you to reach that alignment within the G77 because there's the actual power, because of the power dynamics that I was mentioning in my slides, because there is a balance of power dynamics between the rich countries, and some of those rich countries are theoretically part of the global south. So for me, I feel like it's set up in a way to serve against least developed countries, small island states, and others, because they will always be at the mercy of the rich countries of the global south to agree to move things forward. But I don't see that they will want to move forward if it means that they will fall behind compared to others and globally. So that's the power dynamic struggle that I try to explain in my presentation. I think I'll stop here because you can see many other hands, and I can talk about this for ages as well.
Thank you very much, Wassim. As we share, we have one more discussion, and then we will open the floor for the Q&A. So our second discussion is Simba Marowa. And he was part of the workshop last year that we were sharing with the simulation. So he had experienced some of those frustrations. So.
Yes, can you guys hear me?
Yes,
we can.
Okay, first I'd like to say thank you, Wassim, for that enlightening and very interesting presentation. I learned a lot, but you also confirmed some of the things that I was already struggling with. So my question is, it's about what you were talking about recently. Just now, when you decided to stop, you were already beginning to answer it. So maybe you could, based on your experience and based on your research and what you have seen, do you think there are any practical ways to fix the issue of climate coloniality? How do we decolonize or is there any framework in place right now to try and attempt to decolonize the climate coloniality and to reshape the voices on a practical level that maybe you have seen results or you see potential for it? Because what you said in your presentation, many times I feel like we are repeating the same, paradigm and the same cultural practices that have existed before, but we're just repackaging them. But at the end of the day, who has power still has power, and who doesn't still doesn't, and we may not have practical changes in the short term.
Thank you. I think that's thank you for the very difficult question. Very difficult question, but it's a very important one, honestly. And I think listeners would have exactly. I'm sure many others share the same question with you. And I will answer, bringing it back to the negotiator's perspective, because that's actually what I can speak about, and this is my presentation as well. Because I think, I mean, look, I can give you actually some thoughts. I have some thoughts about what can be changed about the structure that will lead to better outcomes, but I cannot effectuate those changes in the structure myself because I don't have the power to effectuate them. So again, going back to the perspective of the negotiator, what I try to convey with the inner development and the nurturing of inner capacities and the framework of inner development, the inner development framework that I shared as well, talks a lot about nurturing those capacities to have self-awareness, to have that, to overcome those things that will usually lead you to either paralysis or to repeating the same things. I think as a negotiator, and I've experienced that myself, honestly, because as you can imagine, I mean, as I try to convey as well, like the power dynamics within the negotiation blocks that I was part of, including within the Arab group, they're not balanced at all. They're not balanced. So, and I'm coming at it with the knowledge of the context that I'm operating within, and of all of those. If we add to that knowledge the awareness of what is shaping the structure from below the surface, I think that awareness in itself, in my experience, it liberated me. It liberated me within the negotiation rooms as it has in other areas of my life. But it allows me to come into the negotiation room without a sense of inferiority, for example, without a sense of I don't have the same capacity as others, or my country doesn't have a diplomatic voice, that strong diplomatic voice as others. It cannot actually effectuate change, and so on. So it allowed me to have a lot more confidence in engaging with my counterparts and trying to look for solutions beyond this divided way and competitive way that we look at the world. I really think that negotiators, because they are so central to the process of the negotiations and the topic of the climate change that we're dealing with, because of the nature of that topic, I feel like they need to have special qualities. I think negotiators need to have special qualities, special mandate, because they're going on a special mission outside of, I mean, we might not be able to change the UN system within which UNFCCC fits, but we definitely need to be thinking in a radically different way, and acknowledging that we need something. I mean, I think that's what left me with a bit of hope from Baku, even though it was disastrous. I think the disaster left me with a bit of hope because I felt like it will get to a certain point before it breaks, basically. And what we can do, and this is me being hopeful, is instead of taking it on our shoulders to change the entire system, what we can do is start from where we would like to be. What system do we like to see, and work our way backwards? What behaviors do we want to see? And then what system do we need? What dynamics do we want? What mindsets do we want to nurture? Leading us all the way to what are the skills that we need to nurture. I had included the slides on that in my presentation, but I removed it because I thought it was going to drag a lot. But I'll include it in what I will share with you, and hopefully you can refer to it as well. But I did think of a framework that we can follow for us to start moving in that direction, prepare ourselves for the change, be the change that we would like to see in the world as negotiators, and that will allow us to be ready when the structure changes. Okay, Maria wants to shut me up.
No.
I was about to finish. It's fine. Yes.
No, because I think it's amazing to hear this from you, because we, like, during your presentation you said like that the system, like if we don't change the system will change
Yes.
us, and I am happy to say that to see that the system is not changing you that much yet.
No way.
And I know we have 5 minutes left, so I do want to open the floor to see if there is someone that wants to ask a question to you. So let me just open, and if anyone wants to ask a question, please feel free to just open your mic and speak.
Hello everyone. This is Uzair. I'm from New Delhi. I'm doing PhD in International Studies from Jawaharlal Nehru University, and my research area is basically integration. One of the chapters is related to United Nations and these environment negotiations, particularly in context of the transnational corporations or multinational enterprises. So this has been a very fascinating, and I have been waiting for this talk for last 1 month, and I am really grateful for this series. And my interest has been to know about the role of various stakeholders, particularly these multinational enterprises. Since Wassim, you have been a part of these negotiations, and you have primarily witnessed these negotiations. So my curiosity is to know what is the politics of the involvement of the corporations, because we know earlier these corporations were not a part of these the settings. They were not part of these negotiations. Essentially, earlier these conferences were state-led affairs. But over a period of time, particularly after 1990s, when the UN Center on Transnational Corporations was dismantled, and post which we have seen various voluntary guidelines, and these multinational enterprises have been taking active part in these negotiations. And my second part of my question is that when it comes to these negotiations, what is the role of UN bureaucracy? Like, since in international studies, we, as a part of theory, we do study that bureaucracy has its own autonomous character. It isn't swayed by the politics of the state, but at the end of the day, these bureaucrats also represent their countries, and even you are associated with Lebanon, the government of Lebanon. So, how do you frame this context? And thank you so much for this opportunity. And I look forward to attend more of such talks and more of such proceedings, because this is so much related to my research, and I am so curious. Being in Global South, we don't get like access to, as of now, being in initial stage of research at least, we don't have access to these conferences because of various reasons, XYZ. But these platforms do help us to come to a consolidated ground, to come to a platform and do these initial bit before we go for our field work, and that is obviously to take part in these negotiations. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Also very rich questions. Do I only have 2 minutes? Maria, I'm looking at you.
Yes, and we will be extending 5 more minutes.
Okay. All right.
If
So I can
someone
try
needs
to.
leave, you're welcome to leave, but if you can stay for 5 more minutes, like
Okay.
all of us that we're here.
I'll be quick as well, just to give you a chance to close as well. So on the first question, so about I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but the influence of companies and corporations on the negotiations and their representation in them and so on. So from my experience, because I was involved in the Just Transition work program and the negotiations on the Just Transition work program, which in big part is around, the socioeconomic impacts of the response to climate change, and has great implications on the workforce, basically. And there has been representation. I mean, there was representation for workers from the International Labour Organization, for example, and I'm not talking about corporations, but there was representation of trade unions as well. So but I think but they have observer status. So they're not, I mean, corporations can influence the position of their countries by shaping the position of the country before they get to the COP, basically. But then during the negotiations, there are other observer organizations that represent other stakeholders. And in my experience, the observer organizations, I think they bring in such important topics and such important points to the negotiation table. But I don't see that they are heard, at least not even on equal footings with the party delegates. And a lot of times they don't cut through. So that's just my experience with corporations participating in the negotiations. And on the bureaucracy bit, I'm not entirely sure I fully understood the question, but what I will tell you is that whenever there are individuals in positions of, for example, like the chairs of the track that I was involved in, there's an element of bureaucracy involved in setting up the negotiations and arranging the meetings and so on. And there will be a couple of chairs. There was a couple of chairs for our track, and the idea is always to have a balance, to have somebody from the global north, somebody from the global south. And in my experience, all of that doesn't matter if the individual themselves, him or herself, when their mind is colonized, for example. What's the value of having somebody from the global south if their mind is colonized? It's not about who you put out there as much as it is, like, I think the qualities, the inner qualities. And I think what we need is transcending some of those divisions. We need people at the positions of responsibility or power within even the structure and the bureaucracy of it, to be really in line with this view of the world as an interconnected whole, because the climate crisis affects us all, and there shouldn't be any room for bias towards anybody. So I think I will just leave it there. I hope I answered your questions honestly. I think they were a little bit packaged, but I'm happy for you to reach out to me separately as well. I'm happy to carry on this conversation.
Sure. Thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much for everything that you share with us. I think that the time was short because I feel that we could be asking you many more questions. But something that I heard from your presentation a lot, and I love the story of sitting in the chair of your country, because I think that many of us that we go there, we do that. I was also moved from my Argentinian chair, but because my Argentinian negotiators needed to write what they were going to say, which was another story. But yes, we are very grateful that you could join us, that you could share all your experience with us.
Thank you.
And that you were open all this time, like even from the first moment that we invited you, that you said yes. So thank you for that.
No problem. Thank you.
It's definitely this that you said, like it's important, the representation, but also the person itself.
Yes.
That
Yes.
representing.
Yes.
So with that, apart from saying thank you, and thank you to everyone for being here and for following the conversation and participating, we want to invite you one more time to get involved with us and to participate. So we are going to be doing one more webinar. As we said, this will be at the beginning of July. We will share the details very soon when we confirm the specific time and day. So you will hear from us with that. You will be able to access the recording and the slides from today. And also, very big invitation from us to you is for all of you, including you, Wassim. If you want to join us, it would be amazing. To join us for the workshop that we are organizing. It will be not only with the focus of the UNFCCC, but the UN Rio Conventions, because we will have people joining us not only from the UNFCCC, but the UNFCCC Mateusz, can you help me there? CCD.
UNFCCC Convention on Combating
And
Desertification.
desertification. So the link is in the chat. The applications are open. You can apply until the 23rd of June. So we are looking forward to reading your applications. Thank you, everyone, and please keep in touch.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Wassim. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Congratulations.
Thank you.